So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the third in our August webinar series. Are you all seeing my screen all right? Okay, so we started talking about taking a step back, gaining perspective. We talked about the metaphor of, the constellations. And then keeping with this idea of brightness and looking for the things that spark. For you, last week we talked about brightening your career understanding and outlook. That was the acronym BRIGHTON, which is business, research, impact, government, healthcare, communications, technology, education, and nonprofits. Some of the places where the worlds of work where linguists can bring their skills and expertise. And now today, we're talking about superpowers. The conversation last week sort of pointed towards this, and that was my hope, my intention, that when you start talking about bringing your linguistic skills and training, you start realizing that there are things that as linguists we bring that are uniquely helpful, I think, to worlds of work. And also the idea that sometimes you spend so much time surrounded by linguists, like in school, for example, you sort of forget that what we have is unique and what we have is uniquely valuable. So today we'll be reflecting on superpowers, and I know we're going to start talking about stories because it's often through stories that you start to see superpowers be on display. That's especially true in career camp, which we're going to talk about today, because we have former career campers and the person who inspired the idea of career camp with us here today. So I'll just mention Katherine Nelson and Chelsea McCracken are our guests. Our third guest, I hope she's all right. Let's send good wishes to her. Has had to go take care of a spilled water. Let's send good thoughts Dem's way. As we move into our discussion for today. Okay, so this is where we are. This is what we're doing. I thought it fortuitous that this week the Linguistic Society of America sent out this announcement about the spotlight. They do a member spotlight every month. This was the one from July, Gabriela Perez Baez, and she said, linguists are well positioned to provide sound, evidence-based arguments to support the equal treatment of all and the respect of linguistic rights and human rights. And to me, that is just a straightforward articulation of our superpowers, right? And this is something that is needed now, always, but especially now. We're having a lot of conversations about equity and social justice. And, this conversation is about reminding ourselves that we have to remember that we have a lot to bring to these conversations and remember to bring it. Which is why we're talking about our superpowers, so that we use them. This book, I had hoped that it would arrive. It probably will arrive. You'll probably hear Amazon ring my bell while we're talking. When I talk about superpowers, this has happened to me a few times now. People have told me that I need to check out Narwhal and Jelly. This is a children's book. Narwhal, in the book called Super Narwhal, goes around trying to learn what his superpower is. And as it turns out, he goes around and he talks to all these great sea creatures. And when I get this book, I will share it probably in a blog. But I found some images of it from the internet where, the author of the book is taking this opportunity to sort of highlight some of the fascinating things about sea life. And that's phenomenal. And in the course of this adventure, as Narwhal finds everybody's superpowers, he still isn't quite sure what his are, but he's you know, okay with that. It's an adventure. He's on an adventure, and then at the end of the book, we learn that Narwhal's superpower is helping other people find, well, other sea creatures find their superpowers. And this is kind of fun because I think this conversation that we're having right now about career camp is a thing that I created in collaboration with people on this call to help people find their superpowers. So I think now's a good time maybe to, without further ado, talk about, you know, how we talk about superpowers, how the experience of going through conversations such as the ones that we do in career camp and in, you know, just the career linguist world in general, help uncover those. So could I turn over to you, Katherine Nelson? You're muted.
Oh, Katie, you're muted.
I muted myself. Shouldn't have done that, I guess. Anyway, I am Katherine Nelson. I also go by Katie. And I got my PhD in linguistics in 2013. And I worked as an instructional assistant professor for 3 years at Illinois State University. Then I worked as a language curriculum developer for an indigenous tribe in California for a year, and decided to move on because the area was not for me. I do not do large, major metropolitan areas. And after I left, I started considering other ways in which I could use my skill set, because my PhD was an acoustic description and cross-linguistic analysis of Nez Perce, so an indigenous language of the Pacific Northwest. And so you can see how I very directly tied that into my first job and after an academic career. And so I was trying to think of other ways in which I could apply this, and I ended up, through Chelsea, finding Anna Marie, who helped me kind of reconsider some of those skills, the skill set that I have. And frankly, as I keep doing more stuff, I keep finding more things. So I've known, I don't know, what is this, 3-4 years that I've known you? 3 years? Probably 3 years that I've known you. I don't know. But like over those years, I did the career camp, and I participate in a professional linguistics community that Anna Marie runs called Career Linguist, and the Mighty Network. And through those different things, I've come to realize what my superpowers are. And I think that we as linguists kind of take for granted the skill set that we have developed through our education. Linguistics is so inherently interdisciplinary, like we don't see it that way, I guess, but it is just built on an interdisciplinary platform. You know, I describe acoustic phonetics as the physics of speech, but I combined that with social interaction, indigenous language understanding, cultural aspects, education. So like I'm pulling from so many different areas. So, and in that process, I learned all kinds of different computer skills, different computer programs, different ways of analyzing things, you know, anthropological research skills, acoustics, research skills related to acoustics, learned all about, you know, recording materials, analyzing audio materials. So there are so many different things that we have to offer, and how can we apply those and use those, and also how can we recognize them? So I have a lot of great examples from my career as to how I've done that. And do you want me to talk about those now, or should we do introductions and then talk about those?
Maybe start off with one.
Okay, so one example of something that I recently was recently described to me as something that I'd done and hadn't really even thought about as something that was truly unique was when I was working with the tribe in Southern California. They have a series of over 700 cultural and historical stories. And they're in a book, they're published, but there's just an index of names. And one of the things that I did as the curriculum developers, I would pull from these stories because they had them in English and in Serrano, and we would use those to help kids learn the language, so you can compare the two languages. We can talk about cultural aspects, historical aspects, all kinds of things are in these stories. So what I realized is I was tired of flipping through 700 stories in this book to find the thing I needed. So I just took a few days and just started and went through it. And we also had a digital version as well. So I, searched for terms and pulled out anything relating to certain animals or anything relating to certain cultural topics, anything relating to food, anything relating to, whatever sort of cultural aspect, put these into categories, indicated the pages they were on, also added some linguistic content, so if we're trying to provide, teach some sort of linguistic structure, if this one is commonly in the past tense, this is a great story to include if you want to combine some cultural aspect with some linguistic aspect. So without even necessarily thinking about it, I created this taxonomy to make curriculum development easier, to facilitate that, to be able to find stories that would support our educational purposes. And I just did it because it made things easier. I didn't even think about it as something that was awesome or took, a lot of effort, because I just did it because it made sense to achieve the next thing. But that's something I think that if you are conducting a large scale project, like a dissertation or a master's thesis or any kind of research project, you will take for granted the smaller steps you do along the way, and that those are really valuable things to have and know how to do, and will be valued in other contexts in a way that you need to talk about them as valuable things that you have done. So so that is one of my examples of something that I have done. So
that's awesome. Thank you, Katie. And now Chelsea.
All right. I'm Chelsea McCracken. I got my PhD in linguistics from Rice University in December 2012. Katie and I went to school together. And after I graduated, I spent several years unable to find very much paid work. And I I met Anna Marie in, I think, 2014, and some of the conversations that we had, what did you call that, Anna Marie? Directed something?
Identifying your unique differentiators.
Okay, yes, that some conversation that we had that was where we were doing that sort of gave rise to the process of career camp. And I was also in a call where Anna Marie was saying, what should I call this thing that I'm going to do? And I was the one who suggested it should be called career camp. So after a while of not being able to find work, I started volunteering at a nonprofit called the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, which does education research. And I got involved with it primarily because I needed some outlet to be able to have somebody appreciating my skills, and they did. And it eventually became, I'm still volunteering for them and still doing part-time work for them at various times when they can like raise money for specific things. But after I had worked there for several years and had a variety of other consulting work, I eventually, for the past 2 years, I've been an assistant professor in an interdisciplinary studies program at Dixie State University. And I have just left that job in July so that I could move across the country with my family. And I'm now, again, looking for opportunities.
To use your superpowers.
What?
Bring your superpowers to.
Bring my superpowers. So I've always known that I wanted to be a researcher, and research has always been like this is what I want to do with my life. And I guess that's what my superpower is, because I've kind of brought that to every single one of my jobs that I've had, and even to the job finding process itself. So the one I wanted to start off with, and I don't know if this was suggested by you, Anna Marie, I can't remember, but um, the 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 technique that has been most effective for me in finding opportunities has been informational interviewing, which I didn't know what it was until years after I graduated with my PhD. And even when I did know what it was, it didn't seem like something that I could or should do. But somehow, in talking with Anna Marie, I realized that the skills that I needed for informational interviewing were the exact skills that I had developed when I was working on my dissertation. So my dissertation was, I wrote a grammar of a language called Mbelep, which is spoken in New Caledonia. And I spent, 9 months in the field doing field work, and I had to go into a place where I didn't know anybody and just talk to people and interview them and ask them, like, ethnographic interview type stuff and linguistic interview type stuff, and ask them, who should I talk to next? Can you share your expertise and your wisdom with me? And I had, done that dozens of times during my research, and I was able to just port that exact same skill that I had honed into the informational interview process. So like, if I was able to think of informational interviews as essentially ethnographic interviews of people in the field where I wanted to work, I could sort of get through that mental block of, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And it just became very easy to do. And every single opportunity I've ever been offered has been because of an informational interview I did. So I think that's definitely a way that research has been a superpower for me.
And your spreadsheet for your tracking your information.
Yeah, and I'm tracking my people that I've done informational interviews with in a similar way to the way that I tracked my linguistic consultants. Yeah.
I think maybe you said this, but I didn't hear it. And so I just want to make sure that the attendees know. One of the questions I think people might have is, what is the purpose of an informational interview? And like, how do you explain that to the people you are talking to? Like when you set them up, like, do they think that you're asking them for a job? Or
oh no, it's the exact opposite. I'm not asking them for a job. And in fact, if it came across as if I was asking for a job, it wouldn't go well. What I am doing is I'm asking them about themselves. And I'm like, because they are in, like, the ideal informational interview is one where the person has a job that you would like to have. Maybe not steal their job, maybe not, their particular job, but one like it, like they are in a place you would like to be. And so it's almost like you're asking them to mentor you. Say, please tell me how you got to where you are, so that I can, follow a similar path. And people respond really well to that. Like, people like to share their life experiences and in a way that can help people, especially people who share a lot of their same interests. So it's very rarely have I encountered someone in an informational interview who was like, hostile in any way.
And I mean, I think, it is possible people can, but when you train as, you train to do an ethnography, you kind of expect that there can be, people are humans are messy. So
Right.
you come to expect a little bit of misunderstanding.
Right,
That's
yeah,
just
of
part of
course.
the process.
So that just happens. But I mean, for the most part, like by approaching informational interviews the same way that you'd approach an ethnographic interview, like you're not there to get anything out of the person. You're just there to like find stuff out. Like you're there to be curious and to just like inquire and like learn more basically.
And I realize now this must be part of your, it's something that I've heard you talk about as you're talking about your process. You're kind of always thinking about who's next. You're always cultivating the next.
Exactly, yeah. So like you like in an informational interview you say, who should I talk to? Who else should I talk to? Who would be a good person, you know, to advise me on this? And everybody always knows. Like they always, oh, I know what you are doing. You would fit really well with this person, and they can like help you find those people.
And I suppose it's just like you did with an ethnography. Then it's a little bit easier to say, you know, so and so said that I should talk to you.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's the weaving community as you go too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we would love to hear questions from attendees. I guess Katie, you primed me to think that you have more stories, so you piqued my curiosity.
Okay, I'll just share another one as people are thinking about questions. So there's a couple of different ways I've applied my research skills and developed new ones along the way. When I was at Illinois State University, I worked with pre-service teachers. And so I was always trying to think of ways to, you know, give them hands-on experience. Like one of the things I wanted to do in teaching was to integrate like research into teaching or research skills into education and not make it a passive venture. You know, like as a teacher, I'm going to be honest, I like lecturing, but in the sense of like, here's 5 minutes of information. Now do this activity to apply the information I've given you. So I liked to give information and then have an activity to go with that. So in a cross-cultural, or like, I can't remember the title, but it had to do with cross-cultural and issues in a classroom, for example, like with TESOL students, so second language learning. And so one of the things I realized that could be beneficial to my students is for them to better understand who they are themselves. And then also how can they ask questions to their students in a way that is supportive and makes them feel comfortable engaging in a classroom. And well, ethnography, right? Ethnography is a way that you can learn more about yourself and about other people. So I did a lesson on what is ethnography? How do we develop those skills? I mean, it was one class, so they're not getting, the kind of experience that we might have as, researchers in, using this for extended periods of time. But the feedback I got from my students after the fact was like, I learned so much about this student who plays baseball. I didn't care what they talked to their partner about. I just said something you don't know about. And so one of the kids was a baseball player. So they learned about baseball and all this kind of cultural information surrounding baseball that this partner had never known. And so we also talked about applying that to, like, if you have a student who comes from a very different cultural background, how do you engage in a way that's like, supportive and creating a positive culture? So that was one of the things that I did. And then I wrote that up for a journal article, like a short educational journal article, because I realized that was something that was particularly beneficial. And that is what led to Anna Marie, yours and my part of it. We built on that and created a workshop for the Anthropological Association of America conference last year on using ethnography and career exploration. And so I think that is, and that relates to the question we just got, actually.
Yes. So why don't you take first whack at it? The question is, do you have any go-to questions to ask yourself to discover your superpowers?
So I still discover new ones, I think. That my favorite story is a taxonomy story. I was talking to Anna Marie, was this like 2 months ago?
Yeah.
And this came up. We were talking about different things that I'd done. I had totally devalued that story. Not like, I just didn't even see, I didn't see the value. I hadn't recognized it.
Can I remind you how it came up? Because I think
Sure.
this actually is.
So this relates to how to get your, yes. Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So you were sharing it as an example of a workplace challenge.
Yes.
Because your colleagues had, they couldn't understand why, they didn't understand.
They didn't get it.
They didn't get it. So you were actually sharing that as an example of a workplace conflict.
Yeah.
And then we kind of went back and we're like trying to, and we realized that what happened was you anticipated a need.
Yeah.
And they didn't even, they hadn't caught up to yet. Right. Like they didn't know that they had it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like I always think that this always was the case when I was a student too. Like I would know that I had encountered an important article when it would make me really frustrated. Like those ended up being the articles that I went back to. Again, Brene Brown talks about it. Like when she's a psychology researcher, when she throws a book across the room, she knows that it's a book that it's one worth paying attention to.
So I think part of it is because I had taken this time to do something that I found very useful and then told my colleagues about it and they were like, what, why, what? It wasn't that they were like super negative. It was just like, they didn't get it.
Right.
Like, and like, you made this for me? Like, why would you make this? I was like, I made it for myself. I just thought you might benefit from, like I made it for us. And so, so this is a good example of
the reason you were frustrated, I think, is because it's something that you deeply value and deeply, but didn't even know that you had deeply valued it until these people couldn't appreciate the value. And then, right.
And so I think in regards to this go-to question, like, is there something that was upsetting to you? I mean, where you felt like, because maybe that's something that was really valuable to you. The other thing that I wanted to put in here, we were talking about something else where I had created this reporting mechanism for graduate student funding. And that led to a story about how much I loved our department coordinator and how awesome she was and how I had nominated her for an award. And this led to like this other, like, what are some other things that I haven't thought about in a while? And that led to this. So note-taking, questioning yourself. What was something that made, it could be something that was upsetting to somebody else, something that was beneficial to somebody else, something that made them very happy, and yourself. I think using some of those ethnography style questions of like, where was a time when you felt super accomplished? What was something that you were very proud of?
I would also add stuff that you do like to procrastinate, or like stuff that you do, like, I have to do this really boring, annoying task. Instead, I'm going to do this other thing that I find fun that I'm not supposed to be doing because it's not really, what my job is or whatever. And sometimes those things are the exact thing that you should be doing. So I don't know if I have like the perfect anecdote to illustrate this, but when I first started working at this nonprofit, I was really just doing it because I needed something to do. And I would find myself just like finding an interesting, like, I think one of the first things that I did for them was I went and read some of the scholarly literature and made very detailed critiques of its methodology. And this was something that the other people working there hadn't even really like looked into. But that sort of the ability to like read and analyze scholarly sources and synthesize them has become like a major thing in my career, at least thus far. So several of the consulting jobs that I've had have been basically my job has been to write a literature review. And in my my academic position for the past 2 years, my bread and butter course that I taught like 8 times was a course on how to write a literature review. And that was not even like Katie was saying at the beginning, you know, just like something that's a tiny step along the way towards your research project. I just, you know, consider like writing literature reviews as like, you know, everybody knows how to do that. That's just something you have to do in order to actually do research, right? But the ability to synthesize research and critique methodology is like, you know, super important and valuable in the work world. So
I'm thinking about, so this was someone who I often have non-linguists participate in career camp by design. I think it's really important actually, because the linguists in the group have to remember to sometimes explain things that you don't have to explain to other linguists. And this participant, so he's a graphic designer, and he was a temp. He was working at a company where he was a temp, and so he hadn't been there very long. And when you're a temp, you're not always involved in all the decision making and all of the background meetings. Anyways, he's a graphic designer, and they were about to redesign their this product line. It's vitamins. I don't think I'm giving away any industry secrets, but if you've seen a vitamin brand that was recently completely redesigned, it might be this person. But he was a temp, right? So he took them at their word when they said, we want total blue sky thinking. We want you to just like, don't hold on to any old ways of doing things. He took them at their word. Everyone else who was a regular employee at this organization was like, we know that means don't be too innovative, you know, be innovative, but only within this very strict set paradigm. Okay. So he didn't know that. He threw the doors and created this design that was like totally unlike the historical set of designs. Okay. And then it was like this, it was a revolution to everybody. Turned out to be the design that they wanted and needed, but no one would have ever done it. No one who currently worked at that organization would have ever done it that way. Even his boss was like, how did you think to do, like, I'm not explaining this very well, but like that ended up being the thing. They didn't have a job for him, a full-time job. They made a full-time job for him because they were so blown away by this thing that was just, it's what he does. Like, he's a graphic designer. But I think the institutional culture of that particular organization, they were hindering, this often happens, hampering their own internal innovation in ways that they weren't even cognizant of. So, I mean, he was just doing for him what was just bread and butter, like you say, Chelsea. Like, it was just what he does. Okay, you want a new design? Here's some ideas. But he ends up creating this thing that to them is a miracle.
One of the things I want to go back to the question that was asked, because one of the things I don't know about the person who asked this question is where they are in their academic, educational, professional career. And so I think the way we look at this also varies based on where you are in that career. So I was thinking back to the point where my mom says, I knew you were going to do phonetics. That was like, I started. So one of the other important things about me is I started as a mathematician. This is why acoustic phonetics is my one thing I love, is I also have a bachelor's degree in mathematics. I loved languages and I loved traveling. And so I started purely in math my first year at the University of Oregon. And then I studied abroad in Italy my fall term. We have 3 terms in a year at the U of O. The fall term, came back, and I need, those silly distribution requirements. Come on, who wants these, right? So I sucked it up and took the class my brother had taken. He was 3 years older than me. It was structure of English words. That is why I'm a linguist. So I did that, and I don't remember if it was then or when I did the phonetics class, but in that class, the graduate student who taught that was then in my German class over the summer. And I talked to him there because I came to really think linguistics was pretty cool at that point. And so he goes, hey, you know, my advisor's the undergraduate advisor. You should go talk to Doris Payne. And I was like, okay. So I went in and talked to her and ended up, I had 2 years left. I was almost done with my math degree because I went to school every summer and had AP credits and just started linguistics. I had nothing to lose. And once my birthday cake, I wrote, happy birthday, Katie, in IPA. On my birthday cake. That was when my mom said, she knew I was committed to this new field. Because it took me like 2 hours, between like decorating the cake and writing all of it on there. So anyway, that was something that made me, I really liked it. So anyway, the point is, and I thank you for the person, they just told me where they are in their career. So let's see here. Exploring next steps. So finishing undergrad, exploring your next steps. So I think one of the reasons I wanted to know is I think if you're starting as an undergrad and you're just identifying like, you wrote your birthday cake in IPA, maybe that's something you need to cultivate through like an internship or independent study with a professor or something. And, look for those kinds of options, I think also watch last week's, about the types of careers you can have, last week's webinar, because we talked a lot about different careers that people have had. And, so like you can apply your ethnography to user experience design. You can apply your systems thinking to taxonomy. And we had a taxonomist in our group last week. And, it can relate to education, so this person who asked a question, studies different languages. So like, maybe you want to do something more related to language. And
you also see dance there.
Yeah. And so like to me there's like this creative aspect in all of this. So like what is it that you see in here? There's a creative aspect, there's this maybe cultural aspect, there's a variety of ways that this could work. Are you interested in international relations? And that's how you get your linguistic systems thinking, cultural thinking in there. So looking for commonalities and differences. And I think if you're advanced in your career, you've post-graduation, you look at it a little differently. What have I enjoyed in my most recent job? You didn't like any of it. Why? Was there anything? So I think it really relates to, where you are as to how you approach it. So that's why I was saying, as an undergrad, I knew what I liked. My mom identified that early.
So I think that's another way that, sometimes people tell you, they tell you you're really good at this. Like Chelsea, I imagine at the nonprofit, you've been told you're really good at.
Yeah, or people ask you, like, seek you out to be like, oh, I've seen you did this thing before. Can you do that thing again for us? That kind of a thing.
When we were in grad school, for part of the time, she was right across the hall from me, offices. And I would just, go and say like, I'm thinking about this thing. Help me think this through, like the researcher mentality. So we would talk through research together. So, I would seek her out for advice.
I feel like that when we were crystallizing the thing that I used to call your unique differentiators, that is now superpower.
Go ahead.
Weren't we kind of settling in on kind of a deep, this is what I remember now, 4 years later, you had a deep trust in tool to task. Like you could kind of take stock of a research question and know what methodologies and instruments. Does this sound right?
I believe so. Well, I think it ended up in my resume, and I believe it is still there, and in my LinkedIn profile, which is, I think it is turning unstructured data into actionable insights.
Perfect.
And I believe that line is something that you helped me come up with.
Sounds like a superpower. So I warned you guys that I would at some point burst into a segue. It's happening. So when I was a kid, everybody told me that I should be a storyteller. Turns out I do storytelling, but I'm really excited about story listening. But it took me a while to learn that story listening was a thing. And it took me a while to figure out how I wanted to create opportunities for story listening. Turns out this is what I came up with. So Career Camp is a series of exercises that help you find stories, identify stories, think about stories, and kind of think about what they do. So our first exercise, this is a quote from a participant. The first exercise we do is story listening. You have to find an organization that you might be interested in working with for, and engage a kind of different way of listening to their website, listening as if it were, as if you were on the other side of that website, right? Maybe you were the person who created that website. Really just putting yourself into a different relationship with the stories that you see there, which we find engineers a shift in perspective. And sometimes, people do that activity, and what they learn is, I absolutely never want to work with this organization. And that's good to know. That's important information. Then we sort of move forward into the, if that's the story listening, and we've done some work story finding, then we move to storytelling, which Chelsea was just giving us an example of. What kind of phrases, what kind of words, what kind of language can you use to communicate really well what it is that you want to do, to use your own language to do things like help people understand what you do so that they can hire you. We also do, when we're in the story finding portion, we're going through resumes, looking for what I call opportunities to put the socks on. So you're looking for stuff that you say on a resume that might be kind of a little hook for story finding. So looking at a resume, finding something that is in need of some support in the form of an outcome or some quantification. Katie, I'm thinking about you because we were just talking about that taxonomy. Mm-hmm. You were talking about it on your resume, but the thing that wasn't yet on your resume was what that helped the organization be able to do better.
Right. Yeah.
Remember what you ended up saying?
It helps, it increases efficiency and the quality of the product by people being able to find more things, more options for them to include in their own research, their curriculum. Yeah.
Cool. So ultimately, I hope that this story listening, the way that I've designed the Career Camp, the 5 weeks, it's to give you a new way of talking about who you are and what you're looking for. And I think Katie and Chelsea both have displayed that today. You end up with, we had some of these last week too, where people were talking about being pattern finders or being having an imperative to social justice. Like these kinds of things help people understand, what you care about so that they can put you in a place to be able to do that, for them. So yeah, this is the structure of Career Camp. We've just been talking it through with some activities. And it starts September 4th. Last week I was getting all mixed up. September 4th at 2 p.m. Pacific and Eastern. 5 p.m. Eastern. So that's my little spiel. And thank you, Katie, for putting in the chat. That's how you sign up for Career Camp if you're interested. Any last thoughts from Chelsea or Katie about superpowers?
I think honestly, one of the best ways to do it is talk to people or somebody, and again, like Chelsea's informational interviews, talking to somebody in the field, because they're, especially if you're earlier on, because they're going to know, like, if you can describe what it is you're doing in your education or what you might be interested in, they can say, oh, I do this in this job, or they can tell you what they do and you can identify, oh, I like that, or I don't like that, So I think those things early on and even farther along, if you want to reevaluate and make a career change, those informational interviews will help you identify if that's something you want to do.
Yeah, and asking people, not just like people who know you well, like your mom or your friends, but also asking like your teachers If you've got like teachers who you've really connected with, or who really appreciated your work, asking them. I have an anecdote about that from my job as a teacher.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I had a student who was kept writing about her experiences of being in a horrible car accident and becoming disabled. And she also was really into art, and she was really into like using like the body to or using art and body stuff, and she did not know what she wanted to do. And I just suggested, hey, you might be interested in medical tattooing. Have you heard of that? And she like suddenly realized that that was what she wanted to do with her life, and she devoted her life to becoming a medical tattoo artist. And
Wow.
and it was just like, you know, I knew this student, I had read her writing, and I was like, oh, well, maybe you would fit in this way. And it was just like enlightening to her. So I think having those kind of conversations with your teachers, or maybe like a work supervisor, somebody who really like really appreciates you, they can also give you some insights into your superpowers, I think.
I love that, because in the so the last week of career camp, what we do is we go around the room and say, like, Katie, tell Chelsea what her superpower is. Like, you ask. Sometimes we assume that if somebody had something to say to us, they would tell us, but actually it's really important to ask. Mm-hmm. And in this setup, you know, by the time we're in week 5 of career camp, Katie would have heard 4 stories from Chelsea. And stories kind of, they point, right? They show Chelsea doing something really well. And so it's actually a really easy question to answer by the time you've heard 4 stories from somebody. What's that person's superpower? You know, I'm remembering somebody right now who they talked about, they worked as a florist, and they just had this terrible, terrible day where everything went wrong and the van broke down, and they'd gotten fired over the course of the afternoon, but they still needed to bring this set of flowers to this person. Like, they just were so committed. Turned out it was like, I can't remember the details now, but it was it was so important for that person to get those flowers that day. Like, it changed their life, and they told this person, and like, anyways, that kind of a story, it seems like, you know, a story about a terrible day, but actually it really showed that person's, like, it wasn't just flowers for that person. Like, they knew what flowers meant and were so committed. They were going to do overcome every obstacle to get those flowers to that person, because they knew how that, you know, gesture, that symbolism.
I was going to say, we have a question and I think you may have the link of where they can watch previous week's webinars. And one of the other things Chelsea was saying, you know, talk to a supervisor, whatever. One of the other superpowers I have is listening and being able to understand people and respond back with like feedback and make them really feel heard. And I hadn't really thought of it. There's a much bigger story to this, but it was something I developed over my life and my career. But I had this job where I worked with a lot of people and had to provide feedback and support in the sense of like them crafting resumes and them figuring out themselves in a sense, you know, advising. And eventually, and I kept getting a lot of students that needed extra support, and I didn't understand, like, is this something I'm actually so good at that, like, they're giving me so many students who needed a lot more support. And I just bluntly asked my supervisor one day, like, am I doing something like unusual here? Which is, yes, you are able to get a lot more information from people than other people. I'm like, I'm not doing much. I'm just listening to them. But the point is, it's a way of listening that I have learned, you know, and cultivated through various experiences in my life. So this was something that I hadn't understood was such a and it is a superpower.
It's your superpower.
Yeah.
So
For
that
sure.
was something where I was picking up that this was maybe something unusual about me or something unique, you know, a superpower. And I just bluntly asked somebody because, yeah. So anyway.
So thank you for asking that question. There's, I think that's the direct link to my YouTube channel, but if not, go to careerlinguist.com. I'll be posting this recording there probably tonight. So I want to thank our wonderful panelists and our wonderful questions from our wonderful attendees. I want you to go out there, everybody, and start asking about your superpowers because the world needs them. So thank you. I'm going to
Thank you
stop
for
the
coming.
recording. Thanks for coming.